Okay. Oh, hope no one heard that one. Jeez, it's crazy. All right, guys. Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to our third live stream. I think the thumbnail actually reads the second one, but I'm having difficulties updating that thumbnail. But anyway, so this is the place where we actually get to nerd out on Old Testament things. Whether it's ancient Near history, ancient Near Eastern history, excuse me, archaeology, or ancient languages, specifically ancient Near Eastern languages, this is the place. And before delving into tonight's topic, I thought that I would update you guys a little bit on what's going on. So, I've just finished writing a script for an upcoming reaction video on the Exodus, and I will more than likely make another reaction video to our old buddy Joel Kramer, who's over at Expedition Bible, and his video on the city of Ai. So tonight I thought that I would do things a little bit differently. If you hear a squeaking toy in the background, that is the dog. So that's all it is. But I thought that we would choose a topic and discuss it. And perhaps in the future we could put it to a vote leading up to next week's live stream, and we could choose a different topic. But tonight I just wanted to talk about ancient Egyptian influence on Genesis 1. Um, Now, with this topic, it seems that most obviously people, or at least scholars, will compare ancient Mesopotamia accounts, creation accounts, like the flood account as well, and they'll compare it to Genesis and stuff, and sort of leave out Egypt. And I thought that we would read through this paper that's on the screen here, that was actually brought to my attention most recently, I think today or yesterday. And the writer of this is Gordon H. Johnston, who's an associate professor. He's AP at the Department of Old Testament Studies at DTS at Dallas Theological Seminary. And this paper's a little old. It's from 2006. But I thought it would be good to revisit this topic. Before I delve into it, though, I should like to mention I'm sorry if the volume is still not 100%. I realize that it's probably a bit echoey. There might be some reverb. I did try and adjust some furniture, which you may be able to see behind me, to maybe absorb the sound a little bit. But on the whole, yeah. So it should work. I'm not seeing anyone in the chat, though. I'm not sure why, but we'll just keep going. So I thought we'd read through this and then maybe do some Q&A after if there's anyone interested. So to start off, this is the context and contextualization of ancient Israelite creation theology, Genesis 1:1 through 2:3, in light of ancient Egyptian creation myths. And of course, like I said, it's by Gordon H. Johnston, who is AP at DTS. And this was held at the annual meeting of the Evangelical Theological Society in November of 2006. So I'm just gonna read and hope the chat works. Oh, there you are. Hey, we got one. Hey, Mobius. Excellent, excellent. I know this was sort of last minute as far as the live stream's concerned. I didn't really plan on it because of the visual quality issues, but we resolved those. It seems it's not vertical this time. It seems to be more widescreen, and the sound we improved a little bit, but it's still not where I wanted. So anyway, without further ado, I guess we'll dive right on in um, the paper here. So he starts off for more than a century now. Hey, Christian apologetic or I can't even say it. Um, so um, For more than a century now, biblical scholars have generally read the Hebrew creation account in Genesis in light of parallels from Mesopotamia, particularly the Enuma Elish. And we see this, as, of course, with if you guys have read John Walton in any of one of his 6, 7 books, he always talks about the cultural river in which the writers of the Old Testament um, wrote and how the narratives in the Old Testament seem to parallel ancient Near Eastern or ancient Mesopotamian parallels. Numa Elish is one, Akram Chassis is another one. Um, so we see striking parallels, but it's just interesting how people will try and say, oh, it's borrowed, but it really isn't. So anyway, and more recently, Ugaritic literature, which is the cuneiform script as well, but it's an alphabetic cuneiform script, and both describing divine conflict with the mythical waters of chaos. Despite its popularity, there are two fundamental problems with suggesting Enuma Elish provides the conceptual background of the Genesis 1 creation account. Although Enuma Elish in Genesis 1 open with the mention of the original primordial waters from which creation would eventually emerge, the etymological connection between the name Tiamat, which is the goddess in Mesopotamia, and if you play D&D, you know who that is as well, and the Hebrew noun Tahom, which means watery deep, remains a matter of debate. I actually can answer that question right there. I don't think they're related in any sort of way. I think they're two separate words. And more significantly, there is no hint of divine conflict between God and the primordial waters, at least in Genesis 1. Now, with the rest of the Old Testament, we obviously know that there is some sort of theomacy or divine conflict in the Old Testament regarding God and the lesser deities. But as far as Genesis 1 is concerned, um, there really isn't a conflict there. So we're absent of a theomacy. But nearly a century ago, two biblical scholars, Sayce and Yehuda, drew attention to parallels between Genesis 1 and the Egyptian creation accounts. I prefer account over myth, but either way. Which they claimed were tighter than the putative Mesopotamian parallels. However, their work fell on deaf ears, largely because scholars fixated on the Mesopotamian materials, which were more widely known and accessible. Critical assumptions that Genesis 1 should be classified as P, which that's a whole nother video itself as far as the documentary hypothesis is concerned, dated to the exilic or post-exilic period and assigned to a Babylonian provenance. Thirdly, failure to take seriously the biblical tradition of Hebrew origins in the land of Egypt. And fourthly, generally lack of familiarity with the Egyptian language and literature dealing with creation. Nevertheless, a growing number of contemporary scholars have recently begun to create a groundswell in support of an Egyptian background. Ironically, a significant number of Egyptologists has been suggesting this very relationship for years, but their observations largely went unnoticed by those who rarely venture into Egyptology or the influence of Egypt on ancient Israel. For some reason or another, as far as Egyptologists are concerned, they want nothing to do with with the Bible and at least Old Testament studies for the most part. So that's why this sort of study has been lacking with biblical studies in Egyptology. They're all about the pyramids, they're about the tombs, and they don't really focus on the parallels found in the Old Testament. And then they try and compare them with the uh, um, Egyptian motifs, narrative motifs, literature, and all that. Um, so basic features in Egyptian creation tradition. Egyptian religion featured four major versions of the same basic mythic cycle of creation, in each represented by rival sanctuaries: Heliopolis, Hermopolis, Memphis, and Thebes. And each version followed the basic story outline. The original undifferentiated monad evolved into primeval waters, which is Nun, and out of these waters, Nun, emerged Atum, the demiurge, creator god, who is generated slash self-generated in the waters. His generation in the waters was manifested by a sudden appearance of supernatural light. And at the dawn of time, Atum, the creator god of the material world, the appeared on the primordial hill when the waters receded. I skipped a line. And Atum generated the Aeneid, which just means nine, uh, manifest in the creation of the material world. And the apex of this theogony or cosmogony was the generation of Re and then Re Atum, when the two gods or deities emerged into one. And corresponding creation of the sun as his divine image, whose birth was represented by the first sunrise. The daily recurrence of the sunrise and sunset represents a continual process of a one-day creation account. And the creation of humanity was an accidental event according to Egyptian mythology. Humanity sprung out of the ground from the weeping, or alternatively, tears of sorrow or joy, of the Creator God. At the end of the one-day creative activity, the Creator God rested in satisfaction and not weariness. And the creation cycle is completed by the mythical physical birth of Pharaoh as the firstborn of Re Amun. Again, you see the diffusion there, as the ruler of the terrestrial realm, corresponding to the sun god's role as ruler of the celestial realm. So that's Egyptian, the creation accounts in a nutshell. There's a lot more creation accounts. There's one involving Nuknum and his spinning wheel, and how he fashions humanity from the clay of the ground. Um, that's another one that he didn't even mention. So I thought was striking, actually, because of the Jeremiah 18. I've created out of clay and everything, jars of clay. So um, thematic. Oh, if you guys have any questions, don't you guys can actually just go ahead and give me the question too, as far as it's on this topic. I failed to mention at the beginning. That's my bad. So, thematic, conceptual, lexical, and structural parallels between Genesis 1 and the Egyptian creator traditions. The detailed studies noted above have identified three kinds of parallels: lexical, structural, and thematic/conceptual. In the next couple of pages, we will survey selected examples, and the interested readers should consult the aforementioned works for more detail and additional examples. He lists um, examples throughout the paper, though, so. But he limits himself to a select few to simply make the point that Genesis 1 exhibits striking parallels with Egyptian creation accounts. Then we got lexical parallels. So he's going to start off with lexical parallels here. So, several biblical scholars who are trained Egyptologists suggest that there are several striking lexical parallels between Genesis 1 and creation myths or accounts. One of the most dramatic is the appearance of the semantically equivalent expression "in the beginning." Now, I really don't think this really helps his case in any bit, because in the beginning, this could also be translated, if you guys have read your Michael Heiser, when in the beginning when God began to create, is another translation that could be applied to Genesis 1:1. So I really don't think it neither adds nor subtracts from the argument here. But one of the most dramatic is the appearance of the equivalent expression in the beginning, and in both cases, the expression refers not to the infinite, indefinable time of all pre-creation eternity past, but to the specific moment when the creativity activity of the cosmos formally began. In the Egyptian material, this moment occurred when the primordial waters stirred up self-recognition within Nun, which was followed almost immediately by the generation of Atum, the creator god, in the form of a sudden appearance of supranatural light. In Genesis 1, this starting point in marked time occurred when the eternally pre-existent, transcendent God spoke supernatural light into existence, driving off darkness from over the primordial waters. And you can see already here some similarities between the Genesis 1 account and this creation account, this Egyptian creation account. So, and then he goes into some structural parallelisms. I'm not sure if you guys can see on your screens clearly, um, but there are some structural parallels here. I'll read the bit here and then we'll go through these parallels. So, although Genesis 1 shares with Enum Elish several thematic slash conceptual parallels and perhaps a few lexical parallels, it does not reflect structural parallels in terms of its overall storyline. On the other hand, Sayce observed that the sequence of events described in Genesis 1 verses 1 through 13 essentially mirrors that of the tradition of Hermopolis, reflected in the pyramid texts and coffin texts, dating from the Old Kingdom period, but still current during the Middle and New Kingdom periods. And not really a buddy, but I've Dr. Hofmeyr, the Egyptologist Hofmeyr, agrees with Sayce's analysis. And I don't know if I can zoom in here. Let me see if I can zoom in. Zoom. Let me see here so you guys can see this. Here we go. Hopefully you guys can see this. As far as the parallels are concerned between Hermopolis and Genesis, you've got the pre-creation condition and then lifeless, chaotic, watery deep on the one. And then on the other, you've got the pre-creation condition, the lifeless, chaotic, watery deep. So you've got the same chaos, watery deep there. Two, you get the breath or wind of a moon, and it moves upon the water. And then, just like in Genesis, you've got the breath or wind, the Ruach Elohim, moving on the waters there. Thirdly, you've got creation of supernatural light. That is part of the generation of Atum. And thirdly, you've got the creation of supernatural light, creation by God. Fourthly, you've got the emergence of a primordial hill in midst of Nun. And fourthly, you've got the creation of a firmament, the Rakia, in the midst of the water there as well. Then fifthly, you got procreation of the sky, which is Shu, when Nun raised over the earth. You've got the creation of sky when water is raised above the firmament. Sixthly, you've got the formation of a heavenly ocean, Nut by separation. And then in the biblical account, you got the formation of a heavenly ocean when waters are separated. Seventhly, you've got the formation of dry ground, which is the Egyptian god Geb by separation, and then the formation of dry ground when waters are gathered in the Genesis narrative. Eighthly, humanity accidentally created by tears of Atun. And then you got the sun, moon created to rule day and night. And then, so 8 and 9 seem to be swapped here. Humanity accidentally created, and then eighthly, for the biblical account, you got the sun, moon created to rule day and night. And then ninthly, for the Egyptian account, you've got the sun created to rule the world as an image of Re, and then the creation of humans to rule the world as an image of God. And of course, Genesis 1, God does not accidentally create humanity, does he? So that would be kind of strange considering what follows theologically and historically in the narrative. So, but there are more parallels than just between the Hermopolitan coffin texts and pyramid texts in Genesis. We've also got the Shabaka stone, so, Schmidt and Strange and Atwell also note parallels between the sequence of events narrated in Genesis 1 1 through 2 3 and those narrated on the Shabaka stone, representing the Memphite theology, published during the New Kingdom period, and most likely going back to an original document from the Old Kingdom. So the Shabaka stone dates to the New Kingdom, but I think as far as linguistic studies are concerned, we think it's older Egyptian, so they put it in the Old Kingdom. That's I should say, of lifeless, chaotic, watery deep. Then, two, you got the breath or wind of Amun, which moves upon the waters. And you got the Ruach Elohim again moving on the waters. And thirdly, you got the thought and word of Ta. Here it differs slightly as far as the creation accounts in Egypt are concerned. You've got the thought and word of Ta, which creates Atum, which is light. And then thirdly, for the biblical account, you got the word of God, which creates light. Fourthly, you got the emergence of the primordial hill, according to Egyptian mythology, in the midst of the waters, or Nun. And you've got the creation of the firmament, or the Rakia, in the midst of the water. Fifthly, you've got the procreation of sky, when Nun raised. Um, when you get the formation of the heavenly ocean by Nun. Okay, I lost my place there. I think it was on 6. Um, but Mobius asks, apparently I can't do that. Okay. So Mobius asks or says, according to Falk, humanity may be one of the monsters God accidentally created. Um, according to Egyptian mythology, do you mean according to Egyptian mythology? I would imagine you mean that because it just wouldn't make sense with the biblical account. Um, I've actually heard of that before. So yeah, possibly yeah, I wouldn't have a problem. And if Dr. Falk said it, of course, then because he's the Egyptologist. So really thought that I could anyway do that. There we go. So sixthly, formation of heavenly ocean by separation, and then formation of heavenly ocean when waters are separated. Oh, so Mobius says again he had that a week ago. All the monsters God created. Oh, okay. So yeah, then yeah. So seventhly, we've got the formation of dry ground when water is gathered. Eighthly, we've got the sun created to rule world as an image of Re. Again, you got that iconography of Re going on in Egyptian mythology. Eighthly, you've got the creation of plants in the biblical account. Then later, fish, birds, reptiles, and animals. Ninthly, you've got the earth sprouts, plants, fish, birds, reptiles, and animals. So again, 8 and 9 are swapped in each account. And ninthly, the sun and moon are created to rule day and night. Tenthly, the creation of God's statues, cult sites, and food offerings in the Egyptian account. And in the biblical account, we've got creation of man as a divine image, food to eat, and dominion. That's another a departure for the Mesopotamian account because humanity was created not accidentally, but as slaves in order to do all the work that the Igigi gods did. That is as corvée labor or as slave labor specifically for the gods. So, and 11thly, we've got Ta completes activity and rests in satisfaction. And then, of course, concluding here with the biblical account, we've got God completes activity and rests in satisfaction. You see, God rests on the Sabbath day, and that obviously doesn't mean that God naps. It means that he takes up his rule in the universe, in the temple. So, again, Walton there, but you can see some of these parallels with between the Egyptian and the Egyptian accounts and the biblical accounts. It's kind of striking. I noticed them when I was going to become an Egyptologist, especially with the Memphite theology, which is where the theology where Ta speaks things into existence, or at least using thought and speech brings things into existence. Interesting. He'll mention later in this paper that Marduk also says things and they come into existence. He names things and they come into existence, which sort of aligns with Walton's functionality approach when it comes to creation in the ancient Near East. So I know I'm not really saying hardly anything new, probably, but always found that interesting. So, yeah, to continue, as the careful reader will observe, there also occur a few subtle but significant differences in the order and framing of several events in the Genesis 1 account in comparison to the Egyptian version, probably reflecting an ideological redaction or theological polemic against the Egyptian prototype. In light of the type parallels, Strange, sorry, it's a funny name, concludes the similarities in detail and structure are too close to be accidental. And I would more or less agree with that conclusion. Um, and it's not even limited to Genesis 1. We see other ancient Egyptian influences throughout the Old Testament. I think the hymn to Ta, or the hymn, not Ta, the, um, the hymn to the Aten and the 104th Psalm, or Psalm 104, have striking parallels as well. So you see this sharing between cultures. So to continue here is I think this is his third point: thematic and conceptual parallels. So oh yeah, and just to state this, I'm not going to be reading the whole paper. We'll be here till like 10 or 11. It's quite long, and I'm only that far. I'm not. I'm not really that far. So we're not going to go through the whole thing here tonight. So just letting you guys know. So the next point is thematic and conceptual parallels, the four parallels of the pre-creation cosmos. So the Hebrew depiction of the pre-creation state of the cosmos seems to echo the Egyptian idea of original infinite nothingness, an undifferentiated monad, the infinite, static, lifeless, dark, primordial sea. Essentially chaos, right? So the four cosmic phenomena of Genesis 1-2 may be polemically demythologized counterparts to the four members of the Ogdoad of Hermopolis, the so-called chaos gods. The Ogdoad, which means eight, represented the four primal elements of the pre-creation condition: two primordial features, boundless indifferentiation and infinite obscurity, and two primordial entities, primordial water and primal wind. Genesis 1-2 also depicts four primal elements present at the beginning of creation: two primordial features, that is, empty formlessness and obscure darkness, and two primordial entities, watery deep and divine wind, or the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim in this case. So, one, you got empty formlessness, which is tohu vavohu, and it echoes Egyptian boundless indifferentiation, or chechu. Darkness, choshek in the Hebrew, recalls Egyptian infinite obscurity, or keku. Thirdly, you got the watery deep, or the primeval abyss, Tahom, which is reminiscent of primordial water, or Nun. Fourthly, you've got the spirit/wind of God, the Ruach Elohim, which parallels the divine wind or soul of the creator God, Amun, which means hiddenness. So, and then continuing here, we've got now the word haaretz, which he translates this here as cosmos, which it can mean universe. I don't, just a different plane under heaven, under the heaven above, or it can mean the underworld. So that's what haaretz means, which is why he probably chooses to translate aretz here, haaretz, as cosmos, was an undifferentiated formlessness, tohu vavohu, and darkness, choshek, was over the surface of the primordial watery deep, the Tahom. But the divine wind, which is the Ruach Elohim, was hovering over the primeval waters. So you can see this sort of puts even more pieces of the puzzle together when it comes to ancient Egyptian creation narratives, especially the four main ones. They're Hermopolitan, I can never pronounce that right, Heliopolitan, Theban, and then the Memphite. I think it has more in common with the Memphite theology here than the other three. And this is obviously not to subtract from the claims and the arguments made that there are parallels of Mesopotamian parallels in Genesis, because there are parallels there. I think I've discussed that in a previous video as well, in which I discussed um, the the chaos myth, right? The chaos myth. You got chaos, then the victorious God is who brings order into the world. Then there's a temple creation, or then he creates the universe and everything, and then he creates humanity, and then he creates a temple, and then he takes up rule in that temple. And we see that in the Enuma Elish, and we see that in Ugaritic literature as well. So, um, yeah, but to continue here, I'm sorry I got sidetracked. You've got the Ogdoad, which consisted of four pairs of Egyptian gods, the four male primeval cosmic forces, and their four female consorts, each pair consisting of one negative disorder and one positive order, which seems to be reminiscent of, again, John Walton's claim of disorder and order, rather than chaos and then non-chaos or order. So according to the Hermopolis tradition, the cause of creation originated in the Ogdoad, proclaimed as the fathers and mothers of Nun and Atum, the creator god of Heliopolis. These four divine couples pre-existed in the primordial water before it became the god Nun. And tension between the four sets of males and females created energy that stirred up the lifeless water, transforming it into the living god Nun. And then here we've got the creation of supernatural light within and upon the primordial water, or primordial cosmic waters, before the creation of the terrestrial sun. So, according to the tradition of Hermopolis, the first creative act was the emergence of light from the primeval gloom and darkness, the tohu vavohu. After millions of years of the darkness of the primeval waters, the god Atum. Yay! Yes! I'm sorry, I'm distracted. Thank you, the Volts. Yes, we went through a rigorous testing and retesting, and then I had to play around with uh, the program. Yes, I did mention at the beginning of the stream, Volts, there is a small echo. That's the best I can do right now. I tried moving furniture. I tried moving furniture around that could absorb it, but no, I've just got the one. It's just the room. We've got some fixes, if you will, on the way. Though we got some absorbers, some wall absorbers, some foam sound absorbers are on the way that could possibly fix it. But I did everything: enhance the audio. I tried mono, which didn't work. It created more of an echo. I've tried stereo. I've done it. I've done it all. You name it, I've done it. The visual is fixed though. I think it was we were recording when I was recording in the visual. It was like 1260 by 720, and it wasn't like 19. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't 1900 or something like that. It was a different resolution altogether, and that's why it was. I looked emaciated, if you will. But it's significantly better. We're still working on it. Hopefully, when I live stream next Wednesday, we'll have the sound up to where I want it. So, um, yeah. So, getting back to this though, according to the tradition of Hermopolis, the first creative act was the emergence of light from the primeval gloom and darkness, the tohu vavohu. And after millions of years of the darkness of the primeval waters, the god Atum, later fused with Re, called Re Atum, evolved and emerged out of Nun. As the sun god, his first act was to manifest himself as light, before he formally created the sun. In the PT and in the pyramid texts, we call them PTs because it's just easier. We read that Re was born in Nun prior to the existence of the sky and the earth. You can look that up. It's PT 1040. In the coffin texts, the creation of Re takes place in the midst of Ogdoad, that is, the four elements of the pre-creation state of the cosmos. In the darkness, Keku, the primeval sea, Nu, the chaos, Shenmu, and the gloom, Chechu. As his first creative act in the dark primordial chaos, Ray states, I lighten darkness. CT, I think that's 2.5. So CT stands for coffin texts. And in the Theban creation myths, the first creative act of the Ogdoad was the creation of light. The eight were the fathers and mothers who created light, and the men and women who created light. However, it was not until after the event that the gods gave birth to the sun god, that is, the sun was created after the original supernatural light. And the Egyptians believed that the primordial gods created supernatural light to dispel the primeval darkness as the first act of creation when they stood for the first time on the primordial hillock. This is also reflected in the name given to the primordial hill of Hermopolis, which is the Isle of Flames. So we'll conclude here in a little bit here because I just don't want to bore you guys ad nauseum with this. But I do want to stop. Where do I want to stop? Because he goes into the Logos, which gets pretty cool too. So this mythic background may explain an otherwise seeming anomaly in Genesis 1. On day 1, God is depicted breaking into the darkness and formlessness of creation by calling forth a supernatural light, or in Hebrew, that dispelled the darkness of the primordial gloom and chaos. Since the sun was not created until day 4, the light created on day 1 was not meant to be considered the light from the sun, but light from the deity. So this again parallels the Egyptian account where light came first before Re. So and Re as the sun, just the celestial body sun, because Re in Egyptian can mean both the god or the celestial, the star, in other words. In Mesopotamian myth, this would have been Shamash, which was both the deity, the god of justice, Shamash, and the sun god, and the celestial being the sun. So, but he also held the title sun god. Um, yeah. But whereas the divine light as the first act in Egypt was the manifestation of the self-generation of the creator God from the darkness of the primeval waters, the appearance of supernatural light in Genesis 1:3 does not represent divine self-generation, but the result of divine command. While the Egyptian creator god Re Atum, came into existence at this point, the God of Israel is pre existent, and the supernatural light is not a manifestation of his self creation, but rather of the power of his command, let there be light. So the appearance of this motif in Genesis is far from suggesting that it marks the moment of the self generation of God, is a case of the Hebrew author indulging in a bit of one upmanship. Yahweh is superior to Re or Re Atum, the God of light. So it sort of feeds into that, into John Walton's narrative that it's a polemic. So what's going on here basically, Johnston seemingly agrees with with Dr. Walton in that the writer of Genesis here is using Egyptian creation accounts in order to bring about a polemic against them, saying, no, no, our God's far more superior than yours. He's self-existent. He doesn't need this he doesn't need this self-generation. He's self-existent. He's always existed. He does exist, and he will continue to exist, which is unlike the Egyptian gods. So, um, I don't know. We can stop here from reading, so I don't want to bore you guys to death. We can do questions, or we can just discuss it. Um, the topic here as far as Genesis and ancient. We can do Mesopotamian creation accounts too, because that is part of the paper as well. But it seems to focus more on the ancient Egyptian creation accounts. This is probably one of my favorite topics of Egyptian. When I was going to become an Egyptologist, before that fell through, this is probably one of my favorite topics, alongside of the Abydos um, cemetery that dates back to the pre-dynastic times. That was going to be my thesis um, if I were going to become an Egyptologist. That's what I was going to study. So before I made the switch to biblical studies, so and now I'm just an Old Testament nerd, like we all are. So um, the creation, there are obviously, I think I mentioned this earlier though, that there were more creation accounts than just the four. I think I said Hermopolis. You got Hermopolis, you've got Heliopolis, Thebes, and Memphis. Memphis was the capital of Old Kingdom Egypt. It was the administrative capital before you get to the New Kingdom, in which the capital was moved to Thebes. So, um, yeah. I absolutely love the as well. If you guys are thinking of questions to ask or just want to discuss a related topic to this, one of my favorites is discussing this is the creation narrative. It's one of my favorites in discussing the parallels between them, and it really reinforces the idea, Dr. Walton's idea of it was in the water they drink, the cultural river, and that's why you see so many similarities between or among Mesopotamia, Ugarit, and Egypt. Yeah, each creation account is slightly different, and it should be slightly different because it's a retelling, or it's a shared narrative, and of course it would diverge at different places. So in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament account, there's no theomachy or divine battle. There's no divine fight. Mesopotamian, there it's all over the place. You've got Tiamat rising, because all over, because that they were loud. The lesser gods were loud. The Igigi were loud. I, um, were just loud. So they decided to do away with them. And Marduk, being the leader, goes over there and he slices Tiamat in two. From one half of Tiamat he creates the earth, and the other half he creates heaven. So, and out of the blood of a god Kingu, blood mixed with dirt, he creates humanity. That's the Mesopotamian account in a nutshell. In Ugarit, it's slightly different. So you've got the pantheon of the gods. Um, yeah. So the vault says Dr. Smith says they aren't copying, and they aren't. Yeah, 100%. They were never copying. It was a shared cultural background. Just seems like the structure is similar. Although Johnson seems to disagree slightly with the structure. I think he's disagreed with the structure somewhat. I'd have to scroll back up. I think he says that. But um, there's less structural similarity between the Mesopotamian account and the Hebrew account. Uh, but in but Mark Smith hit the nail on the head saying that too, that they aren't copying, they aren't borrowing either. They are. It was in the water they drank. I don't know how to say it. um, so the Ugaritic account is slightly different, but all sort of there was a choice between it was to El was old. Um, so the Volt says though a polemic would have to have some knowledge of some. Yeah, exactly. In order to be a polemic, you have to have knowledge of the other account. So yeah. Um, but with the Ugaritic myth, you got El, the god, the king of the gods, if you will, for lack of a better term. He's old, and Baal uh, takes his place. Moth, the god of dead, Motu, the god of the dead, didn't like that. So he defeats. I think what happens is Motu, yeah, the god of the dead, Mot, defeats Baal, and he goes into the underworld, which creates this dying and rising, or I like to call disappearing and reappearing gods. I don't like the whole um, I don't like the whole dying and rising gods name. I don't like that title. I think it's disappearing and reappearing. Baal descends into the underworld. There's a cosmic battle, and then El kind of calls him back up because the earth is suffering and everything. And then there's another battle between them, and I think he has Kothro Hasis, which is a god of craftsmanship, fashions him a weapon, and he uses it, defeats the god of the dead, and then he takes the throne. Then he builds a temple with a window. So because he's a storm god, then and then the story concludes. The story, the Baal cycle is also missing some tablets, so we don't have the full picture. But he creates his own palace and he rules from the palace. So you can see the similarities there as well. Again, there's some sort of theonomy, a divine fight, but that is lacking in the Hebrew account. But yeah. The Vault says, I don't think Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Noah's Flood really show any polemic stuff, do they? Um, Not really. I don't think there's really polemic going on. Atrahasis is the flood narrative for Mesopotamia, but really the only similarity in Atrahasis, I think, is the flood. There were other punishments. There were other punishments there. There was a drought, there was disease, and there was a flood. And each time, I'm going to get the god wrong, but I think it was Ea. Each time the gods wanted to destroy humanity, Ea would inform Atrahasis of the impending doom, the coming doom, and he would save humanity each time. But there were three punishments in that narrative. There was a drought, disease, and then a flood. So that's the difference between that account and the biblical account. Although the flood account in Genesis puts a spin on it because the writer makes it about sin and the fall of humanity, the pride of humanity, and the fall of humanity. So yeah, and you see this heightening too from Genesis 3 with the fall of Adam and Eve, all the way down to Genesis 11. Even before that, you get the Noah arc, And then in Genesis 11, it's like they pick back up right where they left off by creating a ziggurat that would reach the heavens. So the God, um, they were going up to meet God instead of God coming down, because in Mesopotamian mythology, the gods came down from on high to meet humans, and in the biblical narrative, it's swapped. The humans wanted to go up to meet God, which is part of it, which is probably why the whole thing was destroyed. And it was pride too. I'm not saying it wasn't. It was certainly pride. So, the Epic of Gilgamesh, I don't even think there are parallels, because he seeks immortality. That whole account is seeking after his best friend Enkidu dies. He seeks immortality, and he seeks after this guy called Utnapishtim, who survives the flood. And yeah, he doesn't gain immortality in the end. He just realizes his own mortality. So, and there's an interesting spin-off with the Epic of Gilgamesh too, because you got the gadfly, which, a gadfly, if you guys know what a gadfly is, it's a really small insect, and it actually only lives like 5 days. That's it. So, and it's funny because the writer of the Epic of Gilgamesh sort of compares human life to the life of a gadfly, in that we're here but like a second and then we're gone. So scripture seems to echo that sort of thing too, because we're a vapor. Um, Scripture compares our life to a vapor. So, yeah. But these are, I love talking about this stuff. Creation, namely in Genesis 1 through 11, and then just seeking out the parallels and everything in it, along with text criticism, which is probably another favorite topic of mine. And just like sifting through each document and then finding similarities and differences, whether they're grammatical differences or whatever. So if we haven't got any other questions, we might be able to end this now if no one has any more questions, because I got nothing else. We can keep reading, but we're closing in on an hour already. We're about 10 minutes out. So if no one has any more questions, I guess I will end this. Oh yeah, Billy Carson. The Vaults, really? Oh. So the Vault says, Billy Carson, the waters hovered over the waters, or was it? I think is what you mean. Oh dear, Billy Carson. That man knew how to waffle and waffle and waffle. It was crazy. What's probably one of my funniest things I did when I did the video with IP. We reacted to a video of Billy Carson's once. This is a year or two ago now. Yeah, I did watch it. I did watch the video on Billy Carson. I don't even know, like, I do not know where. Well, actually, I do know the Emerald Tablets is where he gets almost all of his information. But did you? Oh, you did on yours, Mobius. Yes, you did make some comments. I'll do a reaction video to it. If I can clear up my sound quality. I don't know, man. The West Huff debate the Volt says the West Huff debate. The waters over the waters, or whatever is the phrase exactly. Oh, thank the Lord for Wes Huff for exposing him. Honestly, on the Joe Rogan show is no less. Yeah, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Yep, those. That's the book I'm thinking of. Um, it's rubbish, honestly. It's a good read. It's just take it lightly, take it with a grain of salt, because there's some funny stuff in that. Well, I meant the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, but yeah, there is a different. Yeah, it's something completely different. Yeah, I should have made that distinction. So, it's interesting though. Billy Carson has gone silent now, hasn't he? At least I haven't heard of anything he's doing. He's probably backtracking. So, That's the thing with all these conspiracy theorists. It usually stems from some sort of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth for one, or there's some like late 19th century stuff within American Pentecostalism. Now I've got now Pentecostalism itself is fine. It's just when you go back, I think to the 19th century, it gets weird as well. So, yeah. So, well, if you guys haven't got anything, I will go ahead and end this stream. Thanks for coming. Please look for those videos. I'm going to do the reaction video on the Exodus topic again. Um, the script's written. I'm just trying to figure out the sound quality right now. So honestly, I just need to record it. And I've got to start writing the script for the Joel Kramer's video that he recently came out with on the city of Ai. So without anything else, I guess I will go ahead and, oops, there it is, and end this. So, yeah, no problem. Have a great evening, guys.